Hello, this is Heather Hoffman, and today I'm sharing with you the brand new STAMPtember exclusive with Riley & Company. This is called Christmas Magic, and I have a fun little scene that I've stamped out and ink blended. But first, let's take a look at this fun new stamp set. It has got this lovely big main image that has the Riley & Company signature moose. They've paired it with the little Simon dog from Simon Says Stamp. All of those cute elements that fit in the basket, and then three kind of funny sentiments that fit with that image. And then, of course, there's coordinating dies that cut out every single image in the stamp set, including each of the little ones and the sentiments. So super versatile to have all of those. But the stamp set also works really well, even if you don't have the coordinating dies. All right. To start off, I'm grabbing, of course, that main image. I decided I wanted to put the little flower bouquet in my basket, and then I picked that lower left sentiment. I'm going to stamp this with VersaFine Clair ink. I'm using my Misty to line it up, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp each time, or each image, I'll ink it up and stamp it 2 times. Thanks to the Misty, that gives me perfect placement. This ink really stamps great on the first try, so you really don't have to stamp it twice. But one trick I really love to do with this ink is to heat emboss it with clear embossing powder. So stamping twice makes sure I have lots of ink on there that's going to hold that embossing powder really well. So I've grabbed out some Simon Says Clear Ultra Fine embossing powder. The reason I like using embossing powder with this is it is a pigment ink, so it stays wet for a while, so you can set it aside and let it dry. But I want to do some ink blending over it eventually, so I want to make sure my ink isn't going to smear. And by doing clear embossing powder, unlike black embossing powder, you don't have to worry about little random specks that might get somewhere else. Normally I would maybe use a powder tool on this, but you might have noticed I didn't even do that this time because if there's any extra specks anywhere, they're clear and no one's going to see them anyway. So now that I have all of that inked and my embossing powder over, I'm going to set those really quickly with my heat gun. When you're heat embossing, you just want to heat enough to melt the powder, not too long so that you don't warp the paper any more than is absolutely necessary. It'll bend a little bit, but that usually flattens down when you die cut or continue making your card. All right, I've pulled out those coordinating dies. I'm going to line up the dies with each of these. I'm using my Empress die cutting machine, but use your favorite die cut machine. If you need to tape them in place, this has a magnet, so I don't need to do that. But once I finish lining all those up, I ran it through my die cut machine off camera, and now I have all of those fun images and sentiments all die cut out perfectly and ready to go. All right, now that we have those ready, look at that little cutout detail on there. These could all pretty easily be fussy cut, but that little cutout detail is just that little bit extra. And then you can see how perfectly that little bouquet is going to tuck into that basket. Super cute there. All right, let's set those aside. And then to create our background, kind of our scene for this, I'm going to pull out my white top folding card base. You could do this on a panel, but I found it nice and easy just to do it directly on the card base. I'm going to use the Simon Says Stamp Landscape Stencil. I didn't have the packaging for this one. It came in a card kit, but it's got all these fun little landscape elements, and they're all on that one 6x6 stencil design. And there's this, they're just kind of cut in so you can slide them in through those slits and use whichever elements you want. So I'm going to use that bottom one to create kind of a ground. I always have to kind of get my brain wrapped around which way, whether I'm masking or ink blending, but I know I want that little bottom, kind of the ground where the moose and the bike are going to be riding on. And then I'm using Post-it tape, any easily removable tape, just to mask out any of those things I don't want to accidentally smoosh in an ink blend, and it'll also kind of hold the stencil in place for me. I'm using Cookie ink, which is a nice soft brown that just seemed like the perfect color. And I love the Rainbow Splash blending brushes. They're nice and soft. I love the white so I can see on the bristles exactly what color I'm using. All right, and just like that, you could make this card so incredibly clean and simple. Just that ground on there already and the stamped image. Like I said, super simple, but I think it looks really adorable. All right, I'm going to line this up now, sliding it in and out of the spaces because I want to create kind of a rolling green hill. And I fiddled with it probably more than I needed to. It really wasn't as difficult as I made it there. But I have that piece of tape that I'm going to put on the other side, lining up that mask so that I can ink blend with the green on the hill. And initially I was just going to ink blend green all the way straight down so it matched right up with that ground that I put at the bottom. In the end, I grabbed my LIMELICIOUS ink and the same blending brushes. I had to scooch this a little more. I wanted to make sure it was nice and solidly on camera so you could see it really well. And then readjusted. I ended up just blending closer to the edge of that stencil and kind of just getting that first rolling hill. And then I slid my stencil down here in just a second. So by not inking that entire area, just kind of focusing where that stencil line is and slowly deepening my ink until I was happy with the color. And then I'm going to slide that up a little. Now in hindsight, I wish I'd kind of slid it and offset it a little bit so that I had a little bit of a different look, but it ended up looking just fine as it was. But I kind of thought of that afterwards and went, oh, if I'd really been thinking, I would have done that. And then I just kind of masked out that ground again. And in this, I wasn't ink blending all the way down to that line. So I was just kind of giving the illusion of that hill and letting that green blend off into the distance. It's kind of a handy trick with that scene building with stencils like this. So cleaning up my area a little there, and then let me pull this off and you can see now we've got those two rolling hills, and once again, we've added a little more to the scene, and you could leave it just like that. But every time we add a little more of a layer, it just kind of bumps the scene up a little bit more. So any of these levels would be fun to work with and create an even simpler and cleaner scene. But I wanted to create, instead of just a normal blue sky, I thought kind of creating a sunset effect would be fun. So I started off there with Melon ink to create the orange. I actually found just a sunset image on Pinterest as inspiration. This one, I did think of that sliding the stencil different directions so it didn't look so formal and perfect. And you can kind of tilt it different directions, slide it in different areas. But by going back and forth, you get a little more interest in that design with the clouds. So the next layer that I'm doing there is Cheeky ink. And I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of blending close to where that cloud is. I did notice another little spot I needed to mask off there because I slid the stencil over to the other side, and that spot hadn't been a problem on the last layer, but it was showing a little bit there that I didn't want anything to come through. All right, so that is that next layer of ink, and I'm blending up to the top a little to soften the next layer, and then coming in at the top with my very deepest layer, which is a purple. This is Amethyst ink. And this one is a really deep ink, and I didn't want it to get too dark. I just wanted that color tone. So you notice I kind of dabbed a lot of ink off of my brush so that I didn't end up with a really deep dark color that didn't blend well with everything else that I had on there. All right, so now you can see we've got all of those layers, but I wanted to soften it a little more. It just felt a little too harsh and stark. So without getting any more ink, I just grabbed those same three brushes that I'd used just to kind of blend over so there weren't quite those harsh white lines. I just wanted it to be a little more cohesive. So I kind of blended over the different areas. I used that purple to kind of blend just around the outer edges, just to kind of deepen that. And I love how the colors kind of mix and blend. I purposely picked complementary colors that would work well for this. And then just kept blending that excess ink off, and you can kind of see how that softened that up. And the same thing I did a little bit there with the green as well, just to kind of soften. And now we've got that beautiful background. Now at this point, I still think it looked really cute just with the stamped black image, but you know, for ink blending, let's just go all the way. So I used some of those same ink colors to blend over my stamped and heat embossed images. So I used that same cookie ink there that I'd used for the ground, and I'm not being too specific. I'm just kind of blending to put a little bit of fun color on these. And then I used Cheeky ink again for the bottom of the bicycle there. And on these, I'm using the smaller of the Rainbow Splash blending brushes. This looks a little bit darker at the time now than it does on the finished card. Keep in mind these are dye inks and they're going to soften a little bit. So I used that same Amethyst and the LIMELICIOUS there on the flower. And then really quickly there, when I blend over heat embossing, I like to grab a microfiber cloth and kind of just wipe the excess ink off. Granted, on this it's black, but by wiping any ink that sits off that, it kind of prevents it from dulling the shine of the heat embossing. So especially if you're doing white or clear heat embossing, that's really going to be a helpful trick to wipe that off. But I went ahead and did it on these anyway, just to keep that lovely shine from the heat embossing. All right, and I've kind of planned my layout there. Then I quickly grabbed, you could use any foam adhesive, but I chose the thin foam adhesive dots and just went a little crazy piling those on. I like to make sure when I use foam adhesive that I use plenty for a nice stable layer. So I adhered that on. For the flowers, instead of foam adhesive, I just kind of planned where I wanted to tuck those in and added a touch of liquid glue to the back. That way I could kind of adhere it underneath, but then keep the front part kind of fluffed up a little bit so it kept that dimensional look a little more. All right, and then doing the same thing with the sentiment, lots of those foam squares. Took me a little while to really decide where I wanted to put that. In the end, I kind of just nestled it down a little closer to my image. And then I didn't block too many of the clouds or anything on there, but you can see the way my brain works, at least, overthinking all the options before I choose one. All right, I rounded off the top left corner, mostly because it kind of, since more of the images are kind of heavy on the lower right side, that kind of provided something for your eyes to follow around as you're circling around through the scene and the sentiment. And then as a final finishing touch, you gotta have the sparkles. So I pulled out some dazzling gems in clear and put a few little trios of those around on my background. And that finishes off this card. It's nearly one layer. You could even stamp and make it one layer if you wanted, but super fun. Thank you so much for joining and watching along. I hope you enjoy and have a great rest of your day.
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.